I'm going to introduce Dr. Ray. Um, about a year ago, we started by trying to figure out who was going to help us with these surveys, and we hired Dr. Ray from the Ferrara company. I've known Dr. Ray for about 6 years or so. He's worked not only at the Toronto Lawn in the past, in the early 2000s, and most recently in 2014, but a lot of clubs in the Toronto market, including the Granite, Rosedale, Toronto Golf, B&R, all the big names around Toronto. He's worked and helped those clubs with both strategic plans and member surveys. He is the founder and president of the Ferrara Company, as mentioned, and uniquely qualified because he was a full-time club manager for about 12 years. He also has taught at Georgia State University School of Hospitality and the University of Houston's Hilton College of Hotel and Restaurant Management for over 2 decades. He's industry-wide known in North America, particularly as being an expert in this field of researching within the membership. And he's done over 450 surveys across North America. So when he's looking at these surveys, he provides a unique perspective of what the results actually mean and what he has seen happen at other clubs. Why we particularly liked Dr. Ray as well is this is what he does for a living. He's not an architect, he's not a builder. He has, as they say, no pony in the race here of what happens from these results. He's just here to present the facts and discuss them with you today and answer all your questions. So with that, Dr. Ray Ferrara.
Thanks, David. It's nice to be back in Toronto. While I live in the States, I'm married to a Canadian, and actually we have a home just a block away from the club, so it was a real convenient commute to come to the club here today. First of all, I'm going to present the results of the survey. I think you'll find it to be extremely interesting. I'm always interested to find out what the majority of the members feel about the club, because initially we did some focus groups of different members to determine whether we needed one question for a particular topic or whether we needed 2 questions and so forth. And sometimes I come away with a perception of what I think the results of the survey will be, and sometimes I'm wrong on those particular assumptions. And so today you're going to hear specifically what the majority of members feel. But before we do that, I want you to turn and look to the person to your right, and then turn and look to the person to your left. And if you don't like the results, you can't shoot the messenger. Shoot the person either to your right or the left, because they're the individuals that answered the survey questions. I didn't change any of the results. I didn't answer the surveys. This is the results here based on probably everybody in this room completed the survey there. So let's get to the results of the survey. First of all, we had a great response rate. We had 1,271 members complete the survey out of a potential 2,370, and that is with all of the different membership categories that were eligible to complete the survey. So that gave us an overall 54% response rate. Now think about it, in your business, if you could get a 54% response rate from your customers in your industry, you'd be ecstatic. And so this is really quite fantastic results there. When we look specifically at the percentage of in-town senior members who answered the survey, that number went almost to 2/3 at 64% of those that were in-town senior members, and then in-town intermediate members was a higher rate at 58%. So some of the other membership categories was a bit lower, but we had really good results with those 2 membership categories. What's interesting is there was some skepticism by some board members whether or not members would complete the survey online. And we found out that the majority of members did. 92% completed the survey online, and 8% asked for a printed or a mailed copy of the survey that they completed and mailed back to my company. So the results of this survey, now I'm going to tip my hat because as David mentioned, I was a professor at Georgia State University. I taught marketing research, strategic planning, and I'm always very concerned about the validity and the reliability of the data that we have. Because if you don't have validity and reliability, you cannot extrapolate out that the results of the survey apply to all of the entire membership. We can only apply it to the specific 54% there. So there's a couple things I'm going to talk to you about. I'm not going to bore you a lot with advanced statistics or anything, but there's a couple of things that I think are important. One is this thing called sampling variance error. What the sampling variance error means is that we didn't get a 100% response rate. If in fact we did get a 100% response rate based on the 1,721 respondents, how much would we expect the results to fluctuate from what we had in the survey? And basically, we would expect it to go up or down about 1.68% or less than 2%. So what this means, for example, if 90% of the members were satisfied with a particular area or 90% preferred a specific project, if we did get a 100% response rate, that 90% would go up basically almost 1.68% or go down. So 90% of the members were satisfied with a particular area, 90% preferred a specific project. I know what I'm saying is fantastic, but it's got to be repeated multiple times. Feature there. So the results, if it was 90%, would go up to 91.68, for example, or would go down to 88.32. So I don't know about you, but I'm going to interpret the results the same. 90, 88, 90, 92%, I'm going to interpret the same way, that there's a lot of individuals that support that. The same would be true if only 10% were satisfied or 10% preferred a project. That number would go down, again, up to 11.68. It may go down to 8.32 there. Still a very low percentage. So this tells me, at least this one measurement, we can have confidence in the results. But I'm still not happy that we haven't answered the question about non-response bias, which is a concern that individuals who answered the survey are different than individuals who did not. So we look at a couple of other things. I looked at a lot of the different demographic makeup of your overall membership compared to the respondents. So in the center column here, 28% of all of your members are under the age of 40. 17% of all your members are in their 40s. And this is the percentage of the survey respondents. So as you can see, there's a lot of similarities, at least on an age basis, between the individuals who answered the survey versus your overall membership. So that's a good indication that, again, the survey respondents are similar to your overall membership in terms of age. Let's look at one other demographic here. Length of membership, the tenure of a member, how long they've been a member. Again, 20% of all your members have joined within the last 5 years. 18% of the respondents joined within the last 5 years. 17 have joined 6 to 10 years ago, 15% of the respondents. Once again, a lot of similarities based on length of membership. I'm not going to bore you and go through all the other demographic statistics, but they were very similar as well between the overall membership and the individuals who completed the survey. But I'm still concerned that we may have non-response bias. Actually, believe it or not, the fact that you allow everyone in your population to complete a survey, in this case the population is all club members, actually increases the chance of non-response bias versus doing a sample group. So most of you in your businesses, medical research, things like that, you do a sample. You're not going to do every single patient. You're not going to do every single customer. You're going to take what we call a perfect sample. Similar, your sample size is similar to the overall population, in this case, the group membership. So what I did was I took, once the club gave me the every member, their member number, their age, length of membership, the postal code you lived in, how you used the club, we built what I call this perfect sample that of individuals that were very similar. 386 out of the 2,370 potential members. And what we did was, out of that 386, we made sure 20% had joined the club in the last 5 years, 17% 6 to 10, 28% were under 40, and so forth. So we built this perfect sample, what I call it. And to be quite frank, I don't need to allow all 2,370 members to complete the survey. I can accurately predict from this 386 if I get a great response rate. Now, some of you may have been in that control group, and I'm not going to apologize to you, because if you were in that control group, you know you received multiple emails, phone calls until you responded. So I don't call it pestering. Some of you may have called it being pestered. I call it just gentle reminders for you to complete the survey. So doing that, we ended up getting a 92% response rate, 354 out of 386, which is unbelievable response rate. What we basically did was we forced individuals who typically would not respond to respond to the survey. So now we could see whether we have, again, any error based on non-response error with the 1,271 we had. Because then what I did was we statistically analyzed the results of that 354, compared it to the 1271 to see if there were any differences. And I'm here to tell you that there was only one satisfaction question where there was a difference. So this leads me to tell you that we have a very valid and reliable sample in the 1,271 respondents that completed the survey, and that if we did get a 100% response rate, the results would only go up or down less than 2% there. So enough of that. Let's talk about what the findings were in the survey. So a couple of things about the demographics. We had a good response rate between males and females. 51% were female, 49% male, good distribution between the two genders there. And then the majority of you live in close proximity to the club. 69%, excuse me, live within 3 kilometers of the club. This is much different than the average at the other clubs. As David mentioned, I've done surveys now for over 450 clubs over the last 3 decades. And what I did was I pulled out 22 clubs that I consider to be somewhat similar to the Toronto Lawn Tennis Club. Now, is there any club that's exactly like Toronto Lawn Tennis? No, there isn't. Absolutely not. But what I did was I pulled out of the hundreds of clubs I had, about 22 that were similar in terms of tennis being a primary emphasis at their club, same type of metropolitan area, same type of pricing structure, having fitness center, dining, and very similar type of activities. And these would be clubs like, for example, like the Arbutus Club out in Vancouver, as well as some of the other clubs in the Toronto market here, which again are not primary tennis club, but do have fairly good tennis programs there. So your members live in much closer to the club than any of these other clubs, which is a unique advantage for your club, because typically members will travel farther distances to do activities such as golf or tennis, but to use a fitness center or to dine at the club, the members have to be in close proximity, otherwise they're not going to travel to the club here. So that, to me, there's a very, very unique strength of the club, is the close proximity members live to the club there. So which sections or what areas do the respondents frequently indicate on the survey that they use at the club? Dining obviously was the #1 area, and that's 75%. Summer tennis was right fairly close to it at 74%. Then, yeah, wait, you do have some other membership categories too. So fitness came in at 64%, and winter tennis at 63%. Again, no surprise with the tennis, obviously, being up there with those numbers. Pool was pretty far up there at 53%, and then squash was at 24%, and you can see the other activity percentages there. When we look at the number of children that respondents indicated that they have that were under the age of 18 and lived at home, 36% of the respondents indicated they had either 1 or more dependent children living at home, which is actually a little bit less. The typical among those, again, those comparable clubs is about 40%. So you have a lot more of adults that are participating at the club and not having dependent children here at the club. We asked a question on how you get to the club. Surprisingly, this kind of surprised me, 69% drive to the club when you live within 3 kilometers of the club. I guess so much, heck with fitness, who cares about that? Just come to the club maybe. But anyway, 69% of you drive to the club here, 24% or almost 25% walk to the club. That was a bit startling number for me to have there. Okay, so that's enough of the demographics here. Let's talk a little bit about the results. So there's this thing called the Net Promoter Score. You may have heard about it. A lot of businesses use it, especially a lot of large corporations. And the premise or the concept behind the Net Promoter Score is that, in some businesses, it's critical that your customers, in this case, the members, are out there promoting the club. They are talking positive about the club. They are telling their friends, their associates, that they should join the club, that they should consider joining the club, as long as you think they're a good candidate, of course. And they're being very positive about it. And that if you do that, then you're going to get repeat business. You're going to not only get repeat business from those customers, but you're going to get additional members to join the club. And in a club business, that's critical because members sponsor friends or associates to join their club. So it's critical to have many individuals out there that are wanting to do that activity to have the individuals join. So you have promoters. So what we want to know is what percentage of the membership are promoters. Passive is individuals who feel pretty good about the club, but generally they're not going to go out of their way to recommend the club or to tell individuals that they should join the club. And then you have detractors who are going to say negative things about the club and not recommend the club to their friends, associates, or family members. And so the premise of this is that on a 10-point scale of 1 to 10, what is the likelihood that you would recommend the club to a friend, associate, or family member? If you answer that question 9 or 10, you are a promoter. If you answer it 7 or 8, you're just passive. And then if it's 6 or below, you're a detractor. And so clubs are always concerned about, again, trying to have as many promoters as possible, and what will it take to move a passive individual, for example, into a promoter and possibly even move some detractors out of there. So you have 64% of your members were promoters, which is actually quite comparable to, again, those other clubs that we compared you with, with that 22 other clubs in my database. And then the net promoter score is actually you take the percentage of promoters, you subtract out the detractors, the passives don't even count in the score, and you come up with that score, which is, again, the percentage of individuals that you should have overall that's going to have an impact on your business. The average net promoter score at those other clubs is 53, and yours is, 53, and yours is 52. So again, fairly similar or comparable to those other clubs there. So who are those detractors? It's 12% of your members. So when we looked at the detractors, most of them were in-town intermediate members. They have dependent children under the age of 26, and they're under the age of 40. So it's basically your younger, newer members and those with children. And so I'm not going to, I may try to leak a few things before we get to those questions, which may clarify why are they the detractors, whatever. Well, most of them, I'll have to tell you, just knowing the results of the survey, are fairly unhappy with the facilities. And so they want to see changes going on with the facilities was the primary interpretation that I came away with in looking at this on why those, and obviously they have a long-term interest. They plan on being at the club for decades to come, whereas obviously your older long-term members don't have that longevity or that long-term stay there. So let's look at some of the overall assessment of the facilities. I'm going to be presenting a lot of these results on a average or a median or a mean score here. And I like those versus looking at percentages. The reason is that when you put something on a bar chart like this as a average score versus listing all of the percentages that said they strongly agreed with the statement, the percentage that said they agreed, the percentages that disagreed, the percentage that strongly disagreed, you can kind of get confused after a while when you look at so many different percentages. But when you put up that average score, it's really easy to do a comparison of one question to another to see whether there was support, whether there was a preference, whether there was a high level of satisfaction. But for those of you that like percentages, on a 4-point scale, all these questions were on an agreement, strongly agree to strongly disagree. If you have 50% of your members basically agreeing or strongly agreeing, you're going to have about a 2.5 average out of a 4-point scale. If you have about 2/3 of the members indicating that they strongly agreed or agreed, that average score is going to go up to about 2.75. And when you have 3/4 or 75% or more indicating that he strongly agreed or agreed, the average score is going to be above 3.0. So anything above 3.0 has a lot of members, either in all these questions that we're going to cover, either agreeing, preferring, or being satisfied. So as we can see, for those of you that don't like the average scores, I've included these little percentages and brackets over here, which is an indication, again, in this question, the percentage that both agree and strongly agree with that particular statement. So 91% of you felt that the club overall delivered on its mission statement, which is very good. 76, or 3/4 of you, indicated that you were pleased with the club's facilities, and just under 3/4 of you felt that the club was a good value for what you pay in dues and fees. And then we saw about 62% saying that the club needs some facility changes, and 40% indicating that the club required major facility changes on there. Now, if you look at those two asterisks out there, what that means is that your average score for those questions is lower than at those comparable clubs. So your score, the average score for overall being pleased with the club's facility, is much lower. Normally that average score is about 3.05, and yours is 2.89. That 3.05 usually turns into about an 86, 87%, whereas yours is only 76. And then in terms of the price to value relationship question, that average score is usually 3.0 or close to 80%, and you're at 73%. So those scores are a little bit lower. So we're going to look and find out why your scores may be lower in terms of those two overall satisfaction scores in comparison to, again, those comparable clubs there. Now, I'm sorry about this slide. It's a lot of data on there. But in addition to reporting the overall results for the 1,271 respondents, we took every question and we broke it out by membership category, we broke it out by gender, we broke it out by whether a member had a child, at least one or more dependent child living at home. We broke it out by age, by length of membership, by net promoter score, and so forth. So we sliced and diced the data to look at where all the differences. Was there a difference between males and females? Again, now, I'll have to tell you, when I'm going to present the results and tell you where there may be differences. But this is fairly typical at most clubs that I do surveys for. And it's what I call, it's a soap opera. You have what I call the young and restless versus the old and content. And there's a huge difference in many of the questions in terms of the preferences of the young, newer members versus the older, long-term members. Now, I'm not on the board, but most clubs, from a strategic planning standpoint, if they're going to give a little bit more weight to one group or another, strategically, unfortunately, we weren't able to survey future members, which would have been fantastic to be able to do that, but we don't. But I've done surveys at some clubs over a 30-year period. Like I've done surveys like maybe 4 or 5 times per club. It's amazing to see 30 years ago how those younger, newer members answered it, and then do a survey 25 years later and see how those new members who just joined and what they want, what their preferences is. And I've come away telling most clubs that if you want to know what your future members, the best indicators are those of what your younger, newer members want. Now, I'm a little disappointed because I fall into that older, long-term member, especially at my club. You know, I hate to think that my voice may not be as strong, my opinion may not be as strong as those younger, newer members coming in, but they are the future of the club. And so the club, in order to, again, to maintain the club, to have, again, members, proposing individuals, and future members wanting to join the club, the board strategically needs to look at what specifically those younger, newer members want. At the same time, trying to find out how to meet the needs of the older, long-term members as well. But I'll give you all that data in terms of how the differences were based on age and length of membership and things like that. I know this number is a little bit hard to tell you, but anywhere there was a statistically significant difference, I'm going to report this in the presentation today. But if you want, there's the whole crosstabs. I believe the whole crosstabs is on the website. So if you want to go in and look at, you know, what individual with one child or individuals with that's the age of 60 answered the questions, all that data is there that you can look and but I have to tell you, Sometimes it gets a little overwhelming reading the hundreds and hundreds of pages of numbers like that. But I will tell you, if you're having trouble sleeping like I am sometimes, you just pull out one of those crosstabs and puts me to sleep pretty darn fast there, just trying to comprehend those numbers there. So basically, we did see some differences with those questions. We saw that detractors were less often agreed that the club delivers on its mission statement. They also agreed less often that the club only required minor facility changes. And as you can see down here, they indicated more often that the club requires major facility changes to deliver on the mission statement. And then overall, they were less pleased with the club facilities and that the club was a good value for dues paid. Again, with those detractors, primarily, again, it's this major facility changes that many of them indicated that they wanted. There was also some differences based on, again, those with no dependent children, those members 60 years of age and older, and members for 18 years or longer. Again, that's your long-term, older members, typically without children, indicated that the club only required minor facility changes and not major ones, whereas again, your younger, newer, long-term members indicated that they preferred to have major facility changes to the club there. Okay, so what areas are important to members? We listed almost all the club areas on this chart. I'm sorry that may be a little bit hard to read, but I'll just go over it with you. Many of the areas that the membership indicated was extremely important were the locker rooms, the different eating areas, underground parking, the players' bar. And as you notice those asterisks, all of those were rated much higher importance than comparable or similar areas at those other clubs. So those areas were extremely important to your members there. Things such as the bubbled winter tennis courts was extremely important. The pool area was as well, fitness, the pavilion, sports patio, all of those had 80% or more of the members indicating that those areas were important to members. Little less important, although still almost 2/3 of the members, whereas the fitness studio classes, the sports shop, the club special events. The level drops below 50 with squash courts, both singles as well as doubles on there, as well as with the different children's area. Again, only 36% of your respondents indicated that they had one or more children, so therefore those areas were rated pretty low. Obviously very important by those who have children, but not by the overall membership there. So when we looked at the numbers, again, the courtside cafe, the locker rooms, the underground parking, and the players' bar, all of those, the importance levels of those exceeded the importance level at those other comparable clubs to the Toronto Lawn Tennis Club. When we looked at the cross-tabulation, individuals who were frequent participants of a specific area obviously indicated that area was more important to them. So someone who was a frequent squash player indicated squash was important to them. Those who were frequent pool users indicated the pool area was important to them. But in addition to that, we see that in terms of the single squash and the double squash courts, that in-town intermediate members, members with dependent children, frequent squash users, and members who frequently use the kids or junior lounge indicated that both the single and the double squash court was more important to them. The fitness classrooms and group exercise was more important to females as well as frequent users of those areas. And in-town intermediates, members with dependent children, frequent pool users, and members who frequently use the kids club or junior lounge indicated the loft, the kids club, and the junior lounge was more important to them than, once again, than the older long-term members or members without children. Okay, so now we know what's important, but what's the satisfaction level with those particular areas? The outside tennis courts satisfaction level was extremely high at 98%. The indoor pavilion was extremely high. Underground parking, very high satisfaction. In fact, all those three were higher than all the other comparable clubs. So that's very impressive, you know, considering again that you're up against some fairly good tennis clubs, that your satisfaction level, especially for the indoor and as well as the outdoor tennis courts, was much higher than at those other clubs. Comparable, though, in the 80% range were the double squash courts, the single squash courts, the sports shop, the fitness, lobby area, the pool, the kids club, and the sports patio. All of those were, again, comparable to those, the satisfaction level was comparable to those other clubs. These other areas, while they're still high at 80%, the sports patio, the fitness studios, the club special events, the bistro, the sports injury and wellness treatment center, were all at 80%, but were actually lower than that levels at those other clubs for comparable areas there. And then the satisfaction level was pretty low for the different lounge areas, the courtside cafe, the players' life, the locker rooms. So isn't that interesting? Do you remember what was most important before? The locker rooms, okay? The courtside cafe, the lounge. I mean, all of those are, again, low in the satisfaction level. So those are areas that obviously members value, but their perception is that they're not getting much bang for those particular areas there. So when we look at the satisfaction levels, again, many of them were under that 3.0 level, which again is important to look at. I'm not saying that that should be the standard that you would want, but it's always nice to know what is the level of satisfaction at other comparable clubs there. And we did see some differences on the different segments within the group. Members, again, your younger members, those with children under the age of 26, detractors and members who frequently use the kids and junior lounge were less satisfied with the courtside cafe, the bistro, the junior lounge, and the detractors were also less satisfied with the sports patio and the loft there. Okay. This graph basically is just a repeat of what we saw previously. But what we did was we took a graph and we put the level of importance with the level of satisfaction. What we would like to see is, as the importance of a particular area increases, that the satisfaction level goes up. If something isn't very important, it's probably okay to not be concerned if the satisfaction level is a little bit lower. So anything in this box, if there was, and all these little points represent different club areas. So for example, the J is the courtside cafe. The L is the players' lounge. The S is the locker rooms. See how close this is going down into this quadrant? This is what I call the danger zone. If you have something that's rated very high in importance but has a low level of satisfaction, it's a huge concern. These are in this upper quadrant, which is good, but as you can see, they are gravitating down, and those again are the areas that are very important to members, the courtside cafe, the players' lounge, and the locker rooms. And so those are areas that I think feel that the club strategically has to address, since members indicate they are very important, but yet the satisfaction level is low there. Okay, we asked some general club satisfaction questions next, and many of these were kind of related to whether there's a compaction issue at the club. You know, the members feel that they could access different club areas. That's what we were really trying to gather information on this particular section on here. And as you can see, overall sense of safety and security was very high. Ability to park in the underground, thank God that's pretty high, that score, considering how many members drive to the club there. And the ability to use the fitness center was very high score. And the ability to dine at the club when you want, and all of those were very high scores and higher than what we see at comparable clubs. It's good. There was actually very high level of satisfaction accessing the summer tennis courts, the ability to get a squash court, overall exterior appearance of the club, ability to get on a winter tennis court, which I'll have to tell you that usually at most of the other comparable clubs, that score is usually much, much lower than what we see here at your club. The areas that were a little bit low was the overall interior appearance of the clubhouse was low at score, ability to swim laps,
and the pool was low, and the ability to take an exercise class when you want, which primarily centered around scheduling of classes, whether that was after work or during the day. So again, a good access to the club in most of the areas. The overall interior appearance of the clubhouse was a bit low when we look at it, especially with the other clubs. Detractors were a little bit less satisfied with their ability to swim laps at the pool there. Okay, so now we come to the questions asking what type of capital projects members would support. And I'm going to have to tell you a little story. Okay, 28 years ago, when I started my business and I did some surveys, I remember the first 3 to 6 clubs that I did work for. And I told those clubs very specifically when the results of the survey came back, I don't think you should go forward with the proposal to do any renovation projects. You don't have enough members supporting it. I felt that if you didn't have at least 62 to 65% of the members supporting a particular project, you're going to create unrest in the club. You're going to have high dissatisfaction. You may have increase in attrition rate. Don't go forward with those projects. So the board at those clubs said, thank you very much, Mr. Consultant. You go on your merry way. And lo and behold, about 3 or 4 years later, I just checked back with the clubs and said, just was seeing how things went and what happened and so forth. And lo and behold, they said, well, you know, we held these town hall meetings. We brought in an architect. We kind of discussed from the survey, this is what you said. We explained the importance of it, especially for younger, newer members. And lo and behold, they said, you know, we got approval rate, because these clubs required membership approval of any project or financing. And most of them had about a 20% increase in the number of members voting versus answering the survey. So I scratched my head and I said, I'm not going to be in business very long if I can't accurately forecast, you know, and tell the boards of clubs what members want and what they would support and whether they would vote and support it or not. So I went back and I started to discuss with some other faculty members at Georgia State University. I said, I have a problem here. The results of the survey are not representative of how people actually vote. So we ended up doing a lot of advanced statistical analysis, things like logit regression analysis and so forth. And we found out that there's not a linear relationship between how somebody answers a question on the survey and how they actually vote. It's a non-linear relationship. Now, I don't want to get into the whole discussion of what a non-linear relationship is versus a linear relationship is, but I was also kind of interested to find out, why is it a non-linear relationship and why does somebody vote differently than how they answered the survey? So I asked some of the clubs I did work for as a professor. I also have to do academic research as well. I said this would be a great academic study to figure out why this is. So we collected a lot of data from members saying, why did you vote for it, but on the survey you indicated that you didn't support it. And I came away with a couple of reasons why members on the survey don't answer that they weren't supportive of the project. Typically they said was, on the survey you asked a one question item. For example, should there be more indoor tennis courts? Should the bar be expanded? He goes, what does that mean? What was the length of it? I don't see a picture. I don't know how large we're talking about. Are we doubling the size? Are we tripling the size? Are we just doing 1.5? Are we talking about just cosmetic changes? What's the cost going to be? How long is the facility going to be unavailable? So there were a lot of questions. They said, it's not that I was against it. I just didn't have enough information. So on the survey, I said I didn't support it. And then, so I came away with a different reason why somebody would answer the question differently than how they voted. So in a layman's term, what does this mean? Typically, if you can get 40% on a survey of members to a one single sentence question saying they support it without having all the information, that you will get an additional 25 or 30% that will say yes or vote on it once they know all the data, all the details, how much it's going to cost, how long is it going to take. I know that's hard for you to believe. It's hard for me to believe. I was telling my earlier clients, don't do it, but I've not been wrong yet in forecasting when a club's membership has to vote on a project, that if you can get 40% or more that indicate it, and as long as the board looks at how much members said on the survey they're willing to pay and what areas they were unhappy with and what areas they want to improve, that they will get that additional votes required in order to pass the survey. So let's look at some of them, those questions. So the first one, we divided the projects up into two areas. One was kind of the sports areas and then the non-sports areas. Expand and improve the players' bar. 52% indicated they supported that. Provide an adult sports bar away from the squash, 49%. In the 40% range were improving and upgrading the locker rooms, providing an additional bubble tennis court, providing year-round swimming, and if needed, relocate the locker rooms. Now, we like to see trends in the survey. It's not just one question, but if you remember from the earlier questions, the locker rooms were important. The players' bar was important. But were members satisfied with those areas? No, there was a lower level of dissatisfaction. So it's important. There's a level of dissatisfaction and members indicating that they want to see the change by saying that they like that capital project. So these, I think, help in terms of making sure that we have good, reliable, and valid data when we see those three things. It's important, there's a level of dissatisfaction, and members want to have that particular capital project. Now, we did see some differences based on the different segments within your membership. In terms of the providing an additional bubble tennis courts, that was supported more strongly by males, members for 10 years or less, by promoters, and members who frequently use, again, the kids club or the junior lounge. The in-town intermediate members and frequent squash users indicated that the club should provide an additional single squash court. And in terms of expanding the players' bar at the squash court, in-town intermediate members, frequent squash users, and members who frequently use the kids club and the junior lounge indicated they supported that. So once again, these are projects that those younger, newer members support, providing additional bubble court, providing additional single squash court, and improving the players' bar at the squash court. Also, those younger, newer members basically indicated that they supported providing a multi-sports area to expand sports and athletic offerings. And in terms of upgrading and improving the locker rooms, once again, your in-town intermediate members, members with dependent children, and members who frequently use those two, kids club and the junior lounge, supported that as well. So these are the projects that, once again, I said strategically, you know, if we want to know what potentially future members may want to see at the club, these are some of those projects that have a higher support. Now, the overall membership supported many of these projects, but they're even supported more so by those younger, newer members. And then, again, there's much greater support by those younger, newer members that if the locker room needed to be relocated, that they supported that. And providing year-round swimming or by bubbling the pool or having retractable sides and roof at the pool was supported by in-town intermediates, members with dependent children, and frequent sports and injury wellness users, as well as frequent pool users. And in terms of improving the spa wellness center treatments, unfortunately, the only ones that really supported that were frequent users of the sports and injury area right now. Okay, these are the projects that I kind of lumped into what I call the general club projects. These are things like improving the kitchen, so food production is more efficient. 76% of you supported that. Provide an improved indoor adult casual dining area, almost 2/3. Provide an improved open outdoor patio area, 57%. Improving the interior appearance of the clubhouse was in the low 50% range. Improving the traffic flow in the clubhouse was 45%. And providing separate casual dining area for families was at 42% there. Now, the following capital projects were, again, supported by your younger, newer members, those with children, and those who frequently use the kids club or junior lounge. And those were to provide an area that members can use their laptop computers or a shared office space, improving the kids club and junior lounge rooms, improving the kitchens, providing an enlarged and improved open outdoor patio area were all, again, projects supported even more so by that particular segment. Detractors preferred more often to have a separate casual dining area for families and children. And detractors also preferred more often to provide an enlarged and improved covered outdoor patio area. Okay, so what was the preferred mechanism for financing these projects? There were three choices on the survey. One was a monthly assessment. One was an one-time upfront assessment, and then the other was to increase the number of members. And clearly, the most preferred by over 2/3 of the respondents was a monthly assessment to pay off the debt for the renovation there. When we looked at the difference in terms of the payments, the one-time upfront assessment, which again was not supported by many, the average was $2,000. When we looked, though, at the younger, newer members, that they preferred to pay a little bit higher amount at $3,500 if a one-time assessment was the preferred method, but we know that it wasn't the most preferred. The most preferred, again, was a maximum monthly assessment, and that average was $50 indicated. And we did find, though, that your older, long-term members and those without dependent children preferred a lower monthly assessment of $35 compared to the overall membership there. Now, as I indicated earlier, that the percentages of individuals that on the survey that supported a project versus how they voted was different. That it was not a linear relationship, but a nonlinear. The same is true with the payments. That again, members. I also asked the members on that research I indicated I did, why did you indicate a higher amount that you, I'm sorry, a lower amount on the survey than what you indicated you would pay when the vote was occurred? And found out once again, they said, well, we weren't sure what the scope of the project was. Once we knew what the project was, we saw the rationale for it, the need for it. We heard the presentation by the board. We had town hall meetings. We heard members get up and explain whether it was about the importance and value of the project and so forth. They said at that point then, I felt that I would be willing to pay a little bit higher amount. So typically, what members indicate on the survey is typically only 1/3 to 1/2 of what they actually are willing to pay once they know, again, the scope of the project and what's going to be done there. Okay, so the renovation preferences we gave you was that to close the clubhouse down, keeping other areas open and only renovating select areas. One of the other options was to complete a minor project with only small improvements, and then the third was to tear down the facility and build a totally new, efficient building. And as you can see, the two most preferred one was to close the clubhouse sections and keep the others open while the renovations were done. You can see that these numbers actually add up more than 100%, and that's because we had approximately 22% of respondents that indicated these two as the most preferred, indicating this was the least preferred. And so we actually had 90% that indicated either one of these two options were the preferred mechanism, which again was not to tear down the building and to start from scratch there. When we looked at the preference for these, we did see some differences based on the crosstabs, and that was that to close, again, certain clubhouse sections, but to keep others open was preferred more often by in-town intermediate members, members with dependent children, and members who recently joined within the last 10 years. Whereas completing only minor projects and small improvements like cosmetic improvements was preferred more often by your in-town age of majority members and life members, members with no dependent children, and members 60 years of age and older, and long-term members, those 18 years and older. Again, that young and restless versus the older and content there. Yes?
Could you just remind me what that age of majority member was? That's just like, is it just their teenagers? Is that what we got, like 18-year-olds? What was the category there? I can't remember.
Yeah. Help me out there, David.
It's older, age majority.
Yeah, your
Yeah.
age of majority member is our older and longer tenured members.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure whether they had restrictive club usage or not, so I wanted to field that question to David there. Okay.
Um, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, that's a typo error. It's no children. Sorry about that. Yeah. Because down here it's with dependent children. Sorry about that. Good catch. We had a number of open-ended questions at the very end. Primarily, we were looking for in the open-ended questions was whether there was any clarification on why many of the members may have answered the questions as they did previously, as well as the big thing is, did we miss something? Did we miss asking a question about a specific area that was critical or important? So what we did was we took the 1,271 respondents and we basically ran software counting the number of words, adjectives, adverbs, clusters of words to try to figure out how many individuals may have made a statement about something. Because when you read, if you read through the open-ended comments, someone may have wrote something about how terrible the locker rooms were, and they may have wrote a whole page on it, and then someone else may have just wrote a one sentence saying the locker rooms need to be improved, they're too small, or whatever it may have been. So what we basically wanted to do was to determine, taking all that qualitative data and trying to convert it into quantitative data. And what we found out that was, one, there wasn't any new startling information that came out that wasn't covered in the closed-ended questions. I think that the focus groups, as well as meeting with the staff to cover the different topics that we wanted to cover on the survey, ended up covering quite a bit of it. Some of the things that, again, that came out of the open-ended comments was that, again, your younger, newer members and your detractors wanted to see major changes in the club in terms of facility improvements, and that was why their satisfaction level initially in the net promoter score and everything was quite low, whereas your older long-term members basically said that they're pretty happy with the club, they're happy with the staff, with the services, and that they didn't want to see a lot of changes on that. So I think that brings me to the end of the presentation. I'll take any questions that you may have.
Before we get to questions, if I can just, there's just a little bit I'd like to speak about before we get to questions, because I know we're eager. First of all, I've spoken of the task force that's been involved with this, and there's 4 people in the room, I believe, today that have been that part of that task force for over a year now and has carried us to this point, and I think they deserve a round of applause. So if you're here, please stand. Ray Moe, our now current president, Brenda Hogan, Julian Lowe, and Brian Emery, who is now one of our newest board members as well. So they've taken us to this point, and they're all going to help us through the next 6 months before the board makes any decisions on how we would move forward at this point. So I'll turn it back to Ray, and if I can answer any of your process questions, I will, and Ray will answer the questions about the facts of the survey.
Yes. There's a microphone right there. If you'll, this is being tape recorded, so if you could speak in the microphone, that'd be great.
Well, Ray, are we on? I can't. Hello, hello, hello? Okay, well, I'll take any requests that you may have. Ray, thank you very much for your presentation. It's obviously a very thorough piece of research. I wanted to just get up and offer a little caution, because I was involved in putting together the strat plan about 12 years ago. And I would say that the results of your survey are pretty much the same as the results of that survey that we did for the strat plan 12 years ago. And the caution I would give is that we have to be careful not to actually believe everything the members tell us. I say that because one of the things we really tried to solve was the players' bar problem, which is that everybody wanted an adult bar. And so we believed people, and we went off and we spent a lot of money, and we created the loft, which is over here, redecorated it, made it an adult space, and nobody used it. So they just wanted to basically assemble in the same place they'd always assembled, which was down in front of the squash club. and would never use the facility that we created. I would also say that, you know, the locker rooms were a problem, we improved them. The dining room was a problem, we improved it. The kitchen was a problem, I think the dining here was a problem, we got that better. The courtside cafe is always a problem. The deck's been improved, the appearance has been improved. There's no way we can have a second bubble because there's a zoning issue. We just can't get space for a second bubble. So I simply point this out because things are pretty much as they were in terms of people's attitudes, although we've spent lots of time, lots of money trying to improve things over the time. So just be careful, so I say.
Yeah. That's a good comment. I think that the membership survey is only one piece of information that the board and the committees will work on. Just where's members' perceptions now, what do they want, but then obviously there are things that may or may not be possible based on zoning or whatever issues there are that the committee will take under consideration there. Yes.
When you're doing your survey and the board members doing their analysis, do you have a differentiation between a wish list and an actual question? So, for example, the question about the locker room that everybody's talking about, my answer was, I'm satisfied, but really I hate it, because when I had a locker, I could put, never mind you, I could put Phil Willow in my old locker. Right? Phil's a big boy. So am I happy with something that I can put 2 rackets and 2 pairs of shoes in? It is what it is, and I think the new members who come around and join, I may be wrong, but my suspicion is that everybody tours the facility at least once. If not, I know one new member, I actually don't know if he joined, but he toured 3 times. So it's not like they show you this locker and now you've joined and dropped your money and you walk in and you go, what happened to my locker? It shrunk. You know, and the other thing is when people say, I want to move the lockers or make them bigger and bigger, we're in a restricted area. We're in an enclosed area. We're not the Granite Club that just can keep growing and growing. We've got to deal with this limited area that we have, which has always been a big problem. So that's all. I'm asking if we look at these kind of wish lists and reality.
Yeah. My experience with most club members is, one, is they're very smart and they're very sophisticated. And many times there's always that concern, is this just a wish list that members say they want? But members are pretty savvy individuals. And in the survey we said, if you say you prefer some of these, realize that there's going to be a cost associated with it that the membership has to pay. So I feel pretty confident that it's not a wish list, that it's pretty much things that members want to have indicated on the survey there.
I appreciate that. I'm not sure it's really getting out kind of where my head is going. I'm guessing, and maybe David, you can provide a number. I'm guessing we have 500 children-ish.
Don't know off the top of my head.
I just think it's a significant number because when we think about whether or not compaction is an issue, and I believe those numbers, I think it all sounds very legitimate, and I would agree that the results are pretty similar to what we've seen over the years before, and I was part of the long-range planning process before as well. So I'm not shocked by anything, but I think one thing we so seldom talk about is the number of bodies in the club of the kids, and ultimately how their frequency of usage falls off at around age 12 to 15. I know we're starting to hit that cohort in my family. We've been a member 16 years. Potential revenue streams for the club, if we could have a better offering for those teen to tween plus kids, and ultimately that you talk about members of tomorrow, ultimately many of those members junior members today will be members of tomorrow. So I don't want to lose that component of understanding as we go through the next 6 months.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Most clubs, including yours, there's lack of a diminished use of the club by preteens, teens as well, and then once individuals go off to college, to university, there's a decrease there as well. All clubs grapple with that. How do you keep those children involved in the club? A lot of times, if they're not in the competitive aspects of the club, they have a tendency not to participate because there's not enough social programs. It's not an easy answer in terms of how to keep them But I'm sure that it's probably strategically the club will look at those programs and activities that will try to keep those individuals involved, even if they're not involved in the competitive side of the tennis program.
Two things. One, my pet project for the last 6 years since I was on the board is a sport court behind court 6, which I've costed out at about $30,000. Younger members who really like it. Older members who tired of children running up and down the Courtside Cafe or bar, they'd have somewhere to go. So one of the things in the survey was volleyball, basketball, and badminton, but it's really more for mini tennis, pickleball, or just a general kids play area. So I think it'd be great. 35% was pretty good. So I'm encouraged by that. I'll continue to bother David and the board about that idea. I've been pushing for 6 years. And it's one of the few areas that we have left in the club to utilize. It's about 2,000 square feet, and it's worth a lot of money if you look at Rosedale real estate. So it's something that I'll continue to promote and talk to the board and David about. That was the first part. I'm glad Stephanie brought that up. The second thing is 2 things weren't in the survey that our board from 2013, 2016 discussed significantly. One was what percentage should we have for members voting on a capital project over $1 million? And I don't think that's in the survey. I'm not sure. I don't think so, though, right? That wasn't in the survey, right? What do members think that we should have a higher than 50% number?
Oh, no, there wasn't a question asking what they thought.
Right. So that's an important thing, I think, to look at, because some people like me would like to have a supermajority of 60%. We grappled with it as a board at that time. But there's a significant number who won 50%. So that's something I think that would be interesting to know what members are thinking about at this time. And the other is, should we wait till we get to the Price Street property? And that wasn't in the survey either. That's a big, important thing for our club to be able to buy that property and be able to potentially plan our building an expansion or capital project around that. So I thought maybe that would be an important part to see if members would agree with that. Should we wait until we buy that Price Street property before making any sort of long-term capital projects?
Those are both very valid points, and we're just not at that discussion point yet. So from the, let me get this right, the property aspect, just a quick update, we're always talking to Lonnie, and there's always the promise that would be there. So, you know, that would be part of a future conversation for sure, and obviously would, if it was something that might fit into, yes. Yeah, you sure can. And the vote portion of it will be discussed as well when the time comes.
Just to respond to that question, first of all, on behalf of the board, there was no intention of talking about doing any work. So therefore, this is a survey purely to ask members about their satisfaction, what they like, what they don't like, what they like to see, but not what to do. That was never intended. That's point number one. Number two, because we're not doing that, we're not planning to ask the members to vote on anything. Therefore, to ask for a 60, 50, 40%, it's very divisive, particularly in the atmosphere this club's encountered in the past. Therefore, we did not do it, and it's not part of what we started off and what we ended up with. And last but not least, as far as the property across the street, it's never crossed the mind this part of the survey. So it's not fair for poor Dr. Ray to understand part of the background. And what we are here is for the results of the survey and not what we're planning to do in the future. Does that answer your question?
Well, I don't think it's divisive. It's a subjective thing.
Well,
on the second thing, the property on Price Street is extremely important to our long-term. I think our board spent a lot of time on it, and we want to buy the property, continue to want to buy the property.
understood. It's a good point.
That's neither divisive nor not part of the long-term strategic thinking, nor part of the long-term strategic thinking. So I don't see why it wouldn't have been in the survey. I think members a lot of members who know about what went on in the last 6 years might say, let's wait until we get that property before we're even thinking about it. That may or may not be the right thing. I think it would have been interesting to put in the survey, but again, that's subjective.
Yeah, good point, but the second point on property, it's not within our control. So we can't plan, we cannot plan on it, and it's not part of the intent of the survey. So that's all I can say. All right.
Yeah, so about the percentage, I don't want to know what we think. I want to know if you have data about previous clubs taking votes on doing big things. Is 50% typically good? Is 60% good? What's your experience with the sort of the votes that were taken and the post-satisfaction? Because you might know more than I do. I don't know anything.
I kind of indicated in that little story I told you about, 28 years ago, that a lot of those clubs had low numbers, high 40s, low 50% range. And I told them that I thought that that was too low to go forward with the project on the survey. But once again, they did the project correctly, they promoted it correctly, and most of them didn't get 50%. They ended up getting in the high 60s, low 70% range. Now, every club, the percentage for approval is based typically in your bylaws. Some clubs, it's simple majority, which would be 50% plus. Other clubs, it's 2/3. And so those are the two typical numbers that we see. My recommendation is that most clubs don't look at just a simple majority, because it creates huge problems if you go forward with the project and all you have is a simple majority.
Hi, I think one of the questions was about Court 8 on the survey. And I came in a little bit late, but I didn't see any of the results on that.
There was about converting Court 8. Yeah, there was not much support for that.
Right.
I can't remember the exact percentage.
Right.
I can. You want the exact percentage? You could flip.
I was just
back.
wondering what it was, if there was
Sure.
any.
It was remove one tennis court for better viewing, and that was 1.70. So that's like maybe around 18%. It's pretty low.
There was nothing on the survey to indicate what it means to be a premier tennis club. And I'm wondering what you think constitutes a premier tennis club.
You want my opinion, eh?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so premier obviously means means different things to different individuals. But for me, premier means is that you have outstanding services, staff, programs, and facilities. And that you're premier because all of those are the same level or quality. And it's not typically, when you say premier, depending upon what your mission statement says, it could be just premier tennis, where you are willing to put up with a little bit lower level of satisfaction in the other areas. But when you say we're a premier club, then that typically means is you're going to be outstanding and again, facilities, services, and programs in all areas.
Thank you.
I just had a question about the structure of one of the questions in the survey. When you talk about the young and restless and the older and satisfied, not wanting to put out any more money, the one question said, like, it wasn't like it was like, if we're doing it, how much would you put? Like, there was no opportunity to say, like, I don't want to put anything. Like, I'm happy with, like, status quo kind of. But it was like, which would you put, like 50 or 30, like the monthly pay, like the fee schedule?
Yeah. On the question, it said if you didn't feel comfortable answering it, or if you didn't want to, just leave it blank. And we had, I think, like around it's like 11% didn't answer that, which would indicate that they would probably not want to pay anything.
So you did factor in that no pay? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks.
No pay included in the average?
No, the average was the amount of those who indicated an amount that they would be willing to pay.
this may be more of a management board question, but if, like, from the AGM last week, I saw there was money in the bank. There's a wait list. So is the next step then now to spend this money and make the club better for younger members, which is sort of what I gathered it was the survey was telling us, that we have to keep the younger members happy, or else we will be in trouble later on. That's what happened to other clubs, or like, why not just keep the status quo crowd, keep it the same? Maybe there'll be a recession in 2 years, and we need that money, and the wait list will dry up.
Yep. I just have to tell you again, I do strategic plans for clubs, and sometimes when people say status quo, that means like don't make any changes, just keep things the way they are. And it's like any business, if you're not moving forward, you're probably going to die. And so that's the concern, is there's you have a great product here. I mean, members are ecstatic about the programs in tennis, the accessibility to tennis courts. I mean, everything is really good in that regard. But I see a level of dissatisfaction in some of the other areas of the club, especially the non-sports side of things, which I threw the locker room in there. And I have to tell you that I see that as a potential threat going down the line. And obviously, I mean, if you have a recession, then the project may be delayed. But in order to do proper capital planning, that's a multi-year process. To wait at some down, you have to have that plan in place now. And then if the economy is good, and you still have your waiting list and you have money in the bank, then it's time then to do the program. Not if you're a club that's just going to react when there's a problem, you're trying to put out the fire. Those are the clubs that are in bad shape, and you don't want to be in that position there.
I think you covered most of that. The only thing I would just say is it is incumbent on the board it's their fiduciary responsibility actually to always be evaluating and taking a look at planning. So again, this is just the start of that. The results are what they are, and we've got to spend more time talking to you to understand what that story truly means.
Hi, Ray. Thank you very much for all this work. It's very interesting. It aggregates lots of conversations that happen around the club. I'm someone who's part of a family that's been a member of the club for over 80 years, so lots of continuity. And something that was not touched on, but which I did comment on, was the culture in the club, which is behavioral. So we've talked a lot here about things that people would like to see, or they think it would make them happy, whatever. But what does not make me happy is the loss of what I think is cohesion of a membership around a central value system, which is why we're really here, not really whether the shower's warmer or colder, because it's a very old building and it may never be perfect. So do you do work with clubs about the retention of the cultural cohesion of the club and people's willingness, for instance, to older people to accommodate younger people, that different kind of energy and sound and so on. And at the same time, younger generations' sense of politeness and rules and respect, because that was not asked at all. But in one of the comment places, I said, actually, that's what my good day at the club is, when I don't have to ask someone to turn off their phone, and that they don't give me a look like the Seinfeld, like the look. I don't know how to make sure we keep the place pleasant, regardless of all these technical things, where people really want to be, and that's what makes it special.
Yep. Those are very good points. Because you're absolutely right. I mean, the club is not just the bricks and the mortar. It's really the members and the individuals involved, and as you mentioned, the culture. The reason in many surveys we do cover those items, but we didn't hear for one reason primarily. The survey can only be X long. If it gets any longer, then the response rate goes down, and the primary goals of the survey was to look at it from a capital facility standpoint. And that's the only reason we didn't include those questions on the survey. Otherwise, it'd be close to probably 200 questions on the survey, and then a lot of members just wouldn't take the time to complete the survey then, but it's probably something that needs to be addressed in another survey. And I know the company that can do it. Yes.
I was just wondering, we're probably going to be facing the question of do we do it now or do we do it later? And I think that we need a way of figuring that out. For example, in the last three possible degrees of intervention that you pointed out, down to demolishing and building new, there may be ways of satisfying more than the individual level and solving maybe everyone's problem if we look at different possibilities, perhaps longer term as opposed to immediate solutions to things that maybe to some members are not all that important. So I'm just wondering how you resolve that question, because I think it must come up with every club that you deal with. Do you do things now, or do you defer for maybe 5 years, have a master plan that will solve most of the people's issues and provide a superior result in the end for the same money?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely, very good point, that a lot of clubs do long-range planning. And a lot of times that long-range planning maybe is that over the next 1, 2, 3, or 4 years, these are the priority items that we need to take care of. Basically because one is to do the, quote, the entire plan or what the long-range planning committee thinks should be done. The club may not have that much capital or be able to ask members to pay for that. They wouldn't approve it. So many of those things may be implemented over time. But whether it's service-related items or whether it's specific capital, that's the next step that the club is going to go through, is to determine these are the projects, these are the ones we'll probably do somewhat. Now, when I say fast, nothing happens in a capital project that's, to do something in a year would be extremely fast, probably more like 2 years out. I know for some of you that want to see change right away, that may take too long. But a lot of these projects that probably do get done will be over a very long period of time. That's why it's called a long-range master capital plan.
But I guess what I'm thinking of is actually deferring those projects, having a building fund, and maybe we're looking at 5, 10 years rather than 2, 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think that's one of the things the committee is going to look at, what those options are.
David, are you going to address what the process is from here?
So I guess I mentioned it at the beginning. The task force will be meeting in the near future to discuss what future meetings we will be having, whether they be in the form of focus groups or town halls, or whether anybody even will assist us through that. But that's about another 6 months of discussion. As I said, the key here is there's been a lot of different ideas that have come out of this, so this is kind of first blush at that. But we'll have to understand more about what this means. There was a discussion of Court 8 and a discussion of this over here. Well, if the members wanted to do all of these projects, and to John's point, I mean, that might become a large project. So we have to understand what that is first, and then the board will make decisions of what the plan will be going. So I would expect to hear more, not to commit anything, but kind of near the end of the year or the start of the year about kind of what next steps would be. Right now, it's just still research information, if that helps. And then to Len here.
Is it open? Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Great. I am a past president, but the days were different in those days. We took it very easily. We just made sure the courts were clean, and that's all we had to worry about, because we are a tennis club. We're possibly, we say premier, but we are a tennis club. We're one of the major tennis clubs with a history going back to the later 1800s. And that's what we are. We happen to have an incredible location, as you said, quite rightly, Ray. But I would say that first and foremost, there's a lot of us here who've been presidents or been on committees who've contributed. And we've contributed to keep the club as a club. Friendly, we brought new people in, some we didn't like, we got rid of probably, but overall we love the club, we love the courts, it's how you behave, it's how you mix, and we don't want a lot of airy-fairy things. If you want to go to a skating club, go to the Granite and be treated like a number. But we are a club. We're right in the heart of the greatest city in this country. And that's very important. And we're not going to give that up. I mean, I'm an older man now, but I'll fight for everything for this club. I've been on committees. I possibly upset a few people in my time, but this is the Toronto Lawn Tennis Club, and it isn't going to change, right? Thank you.
Comments. For the years, I always believed the strength of the club is the small bench at the entrance of the club. I haven't seen in too many clubs the ambience that you can walk in, you can make a game when you come in, you don't have to bring your partners or so on. And to me, it's a very valuable survey. Personally, I haven't found anything shocking in it. But to me, the most important thing, as Len said, to keep the ambience of the club, the friendliness, the casualness. And I just always hope that nobody ever going to change the life of the deck or the comradeship.
That's a very good summary. That, again, one of the critical things for a club is it's the membership, the interaction, the programs, the culture in the club. But once again, the club already has that. I guess the survey we were trying to find out was whether members are happy with the facilities and whether they wanted to see any changes in that. But those things are very critical and important for the club, absolutely. All right. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience. Appreciate it.
Dr. Ray, thank you for all your work.